Hi everybody, welcome to the Indie Scientology podcast. I'm your host Andy Nolch, and it's nice to be here listening to Strauss. This is a podcast that has everything to do with Scientology. If you're interested in seeing something funny, check out the Kink TV show on YouTube, because this podcast is not a funny podcast. It's a religious podcast. If you like the podcast, make sure you subscribe to it in iTunes or at Andy Nolch's YouTube channel. If you have no idea what Scientology is, then listen to the first few episodes of this podcast, episodes 1 to 4, and including this one as well. And it'll give you a good basic idea of what Scientology is and answer some of your questions, because it can be quite a complex religion. Oh, it's time to go down the rabbit hole into that wonderful world, that wacky world of Scientology. Welcome to the Indie Scientology podcast. Today's podcast is going to be all about the different types of Scientologists that there is. I'm not sure what the correct English is on this. I think it's R. Anyway, because there's different types of Scientologists, so I thought I should do a podcast explaining the different types, and I'll help you to understand what the hell is going on in Scientology, because it's quite a complex thing. But before that, there is some news, some Scientology news I wouldn't mind going over, which is quite interesting. And this is an article that's on Tony Ortega's website, and his website tends to be sort of negative information about Scientology. He's quite anti-Scientology. And he's got an article here that's quite interesting, and it's called Scientology's Latest Drama in Russia, the Mystery Woman Who Infiltrated an Org. Ooh, see, it's exciting, isn't it? It's like, what's going on here? Because Scientology is a bit popular in Russia at the moment. Okay, our thanks to Daniel Tilevich for making us aware that numerous Russian media outlets are carrying stories about a woman named Darya Vanovskaya, who spent more than a year working at Scientology's St. Petersburg org in order to secretly gather information about it. Ooh. So she wasn't there to actually do Scientology, she was there to secretly get information. Vanovskaya insists that when she joined the St. Petersburg's org in April 2015, she was a journalist working on assignment to secretly film the org. But at least one news outlet there has characterized her as simply a member who became disgruntled and left the church after it was raided by law enforcement earlier this year. Either way, she was there long enough that she was hired on staff as an ethics officer and later became a registrar, a person whose job it is to get people to sign up for more courses and give more money. Yeah, it's like a Scientology salesman. While doing that job, she used her smartphone to capture quite a bit of footage. Interesting. It says it's so different these days compared to 30 years ago, because these days you've got these awesome phones just in your pocket that can film anything and record anything. At one point, for example, she catches the supervising registrar as he tells her colleagues that they've only brought in 4 million rubles that week, about $64,000. It's not bad for a GI these days. These days it's actually really quite good for an org to get 64,000 in a week. Scientology has really gone a lot smaller amongst the church because a lot of people are woken up to what's going on. So yeah, more like There's lots of weeks where there's, I think, 10,000 going on and 20,000 going on, which is just pays the bills. It's barely anything. Feel sorry for the church members. I'm not a church member, by the way. Yeah, so it says here, perhaps the best footage that Dahlia managed to sneak out during her time was something that we've seen elsewhere, a bizarre ritual where cash is thrown in the air. Okay. Dahlia's story first went public in July during a two-part report on Nika Stryak's Channel 5 show titled The Soul Rippers. On October 5, a press conference featuring Zarnovskaya, these names are too hard, was held that carried the name. It's funny, my last name's Nolch, Nolch, and it looks pretty simple. But some people have problems with that, Nolch. It looks the way it sounds, and some people have problems with that. A lot of people have problems with that. Imagine how these people get on. I mean, you can't ever expect me to get a name like Varnovskaya correct. And the average person can't even get Nolch correct, and it's simple as. Okay, sorry. On October 5, a press conference featuring Zarnovskaya was held that carried the name The Shadow Billions of Russian Scientologists. The American cult undermining our state's economy. Wow. She appeared with 4 experts, Alexander Korolov of the Russian Centers for the Study of Religion and Sex, Father Georgy Ioffe of St. Petersburg Orthodox Diocese, Father Arkady Severini, Dean of St. Petersburg's Orthodox Institute of Religious Studies and Church Arts, and Nikia Dolgarev of the Center for Psychological Security. The conference resulted in a brief story that appeared in some English-language websites, but it didn't explain who Zarnovskaya was, and it also didn't quote Father Ioffe, who claimed that the US government had stopped persecuting Scientologists in the mid-80s because an agreement had been reached so that Scientology would supply the US government's intelligence agencies with information about people who take core church courses. Oh no. Oh my god, that's Scientology is a CIA front, is a favorite Russian theory. Yeah, I've heard this theory that the church got infiltrated sort of by the government, the American government or CIA or something in the 80s. And I do know if you're a church member, you're sort of forced to follow the law and stuff and pay your taxes and stuff. Otherwise, you can't do the OT levels and stuff like that. So it is kind of like I genuinely don't think the Church of Scientology is a threat to the US government. If anything, it encourages people to follow the governmental laws. But that's interesting. See, the Russians are concerned that Scientology might be something to do with the CIA. But because the Church of Scientology got granted by the American government a non-profit status in 1993. So you wonder, what did they do in order to get that non-profit status? They could have signed agreements like this that say you're going to give us information about your church members who aren't paying their taxes or something like that. You never know. In the various news reports, Varnovskaya said that the St. Petersburg org was taking in revenue of 16 million to 25 million rubles a month, which is about 250,000 to 400,000 in sales of books, e-meters, and courses. So it's doing, yeah. Scientology is quite popular in Russia. It's doing the Church of Scientology's version of Scientology is quite. Oh, actually, both versions, independent Scientology and the Church, is quite popular over there. And when I was involved with the church, I remember there being a bit of talk about Taiwan and Russia as being these, exciting places where Scientology's actually got people on courses, kind of like what the Church of Scientology was in the 70s, where people were actually, going in, not just 5 or 4 people in the course room and it being quiet, like what it is in Melbourne and a lot of the Western countries. She said that discipline at the org is harsh, and she has asked for the state's protection since going public, as she expects to be the subject of retaliation. One report indicated that Varnovskaya will be giving testimony in ongoing investigations of Scientology being conducted by local authorities. Asked if Scientology interferes in Russian politics, she said that the org stays out of politics and its main goal is making money. Sorry. That's very. Who knows? Who knows if this article's any of the information is in this article is true? But I'll tell you what, that sentence is probably the most true one. Varnovskaya said it was her opinion that the only way to deal with Scientology was to declare it a fraudulent organization and criminally indict it. Otherwise, she said, Scientology is impossible to shut down, as it always finds a way to survive. And you have to wonder, how come the church is always surviving? Why is I know Scientologists are dedicated, like the church members and that, to looking after it. But it makes you almost, wonder, like, ooh, are they getting protection from the governments, ooh. Meanwhile, she is touchy about how she's been portrayed in news stories, at least one of which has questioned her claim that she was a journalist when she joined the St. Petersburg org. When the news organization NTV characterized her as merely a disgruntled former Scientologist, she went on the attack in its comments section. NTV, why are you lying to people and ruining my reputation? I am Darya Varnovskaya, not a Scientologist, but a journalist who purposely infiltrated this so-called church in order to collect information and reveal it to the public. Why are you saying that I came under the influence of Scientology and need protection? Why did all the other channels prepare normal reports about my investigation, but you make up fairy tales? We've sent Varnovskaya a message and hope to ask her questions about her work soon. Wow, so that's kind of interesting. Yeah, people do that, and when you do courses of Scientology in the church, you get put on an e-meter, and they ask you some questions like, "Are you from the government, or are you a journalist doing a story on Scientology?" Because basically, if you're there as a journalist just to do a story, you're not allowed to do Scientology because it's courses you do to improve yourself and stuff. And so that's the deal. Like, you be there because you actually want to do the course and improve yourself, not because you want to do some story as a journalist. And there's also another interesting article about Scientology that's on the Vice.com website, and they do good news stories. And it's called Into the Free Zone, Practicing Scientology Outside of the Church. Sarah joined the Church of Scientology in 1977. She was 19 years old, a college student in Boston. After finishing the church's introductory communication courses, she joined the Church of Scientology staff in Los Angeles. Around that time, she met who she describes as her past life husband, another member of the religion who was working at Flag, the church's spiritual headquarters in Clearwater, Florida. There's a long and weird-sounding romance story, but in short, we discovered that everyone was trying to keep us apart. That wasn't acceptable, so we left. We literally disappeared overnight, says Sarah. It was very much a last straw thing. We saw too many stupid things being done that were not in the direction of helping people to better themselves. It's an amazing example of Parnell's law. Except in our minds it was the difference between sometimes miraculous technology and a blithering idiots at the helm. Yes, I noticed that a bit as well, being involved with the Church of Scientology, that like it was great, but some of the people who were working there were just idiots and just really dumb, and the behavior was just like, it was just stupid, basically. Sarah was only a member of the church for 3 years, from the spring of 77 until January of 1980. The 1980s were the start of a particularly tumultuous time for Scientology. Yes, it was. It was a big period during that time. Founder L. Ron Hubbard was pushed out of the scene, and the controversial David Miscavige seized control. Miscavige's reign over the last few decades has been marked by accusations of physical abuse, economic exploitation, and mafia-like fear tactics. In a sense, Miscavige is responsible for Scientology's current reputation as a global money-grubbing scam. I agree to that. This article has been quite accurate so far. It's just, he changed the culture, he made it quite hardcore. Sarah left, but in 2015, long past her 20s and her brief stint in the church, she's still a Scientologist. She's part of a group of people who practice a religion outside of the church. It's called independent Scientology, or more colloquially, free zone Scientology. Those who believe in the technology and some or all of L. Ron Hubbard's ideas, but refuse to conform with the orthodoxy. It's kind of for the rebels, really. And also the people who are smart that can see that the church is just not running well and want to start something up outside of the church in order to help people because they think they can do a better job. Some free zoners came to Scientology completely autonomous. Also, by the way, you can be an auditor in the church, for example, like deliver the counselling sorry, not in the church, but you can be part of the church, right? But deliver the auditing at your home. But I think you have to give some of the money to the church, like as a commission. See, but here's the thing: you could be a rebel and say "F you" to the church and just audit people at your home and keep all the money yourself. But you're not really going to get sent people from the church, right? So it might be harder to find people to deliver Scientology on. But just to be a little naughty boy here right now and tell you, that wouldn't be a bad job to get into, to be an auditor and not be involved with the church, and then you can charge $100 an hour and keep the money yourself. And yeah, so anyway, I recommend being an independent, because also when you're involved with the church, it's not just a matter of them wanting the money; it's also the matter of them teaching you how to do Scientology incorrectly. Mainly, that's the main reason why I left the church. Like, it's not quite right. So you can do a whole podcast on that. But if anyone's just thinking of a career to do, being a Scientology auditor is genuinely, quite possibly, could be a really good career for you, and a lot of people do it and enjoy it, and it can be very interesting, and you can learn a lot. It's kind of similar to, like, let's say being a doctor where you have to study for years. Like, you kind of have to study for years to be a good Scientologist auditor. But I don't think it would be as expensive as training to be a doctor or something. And yeah, I think it's a growth industry, and I think it would be a really cool job. Like, I'm not in that field. Maybe one day in retirement I might take up being an auditor or something. But look, I genuinely think it's up there as one of the coolest jobs you could have. Seriously. So if you're looking for a career change, look into it, being a Scientology auditor. So it says here, some free zoners, they call it free zone because it's like you're free. It's a zone where you're free. You're not controlled by a church or other things. Some free zoners came to Scientology completely autonomous of the church. But most are former members who are fed up with the exploitation and the bureaucracy and believe Scientology can still be a pure, positive thing. They continue to practice and continue to believe, whether Miscavige likes it or not. So the church obviously don't like people leaving the church and starting up their own thing, because they can, instead of charging $200 an hour, they can go charge $80 an hour, and then they're going to get much more people go to them. So the church doesn't like that. They want to be the only ones delivering Scientology. And also the church actually believe that people who aren't involved with them actually delivering Scientology are wrong. But a lot of people beg to differ. The Free Zone encompasses thousands of people and many different groups of practitioners, but there are other breakaway groups like the California Association of Dianetic Auditors that claim to have been founded as early as 1950. There is no clear organised Scientology assembly removed from the church, and while long-standing independent organisations like the one mentioned before, most people on the outside follow their own interpretations and their own rules. Yes, it's kind of a little bit like the Wild Wild West, the independent field. The free zone or independent scene or indie Scientology is just people who practice Scientology and Dianetics outside of the Church of Scientology, because there's no centralized authority there. It's mainly loose-knit practitioners, so practices vary. It's not standardized, says Claire, a former free zone Scientologist. The beliefs of free zone Scientologists also vary. There are some who only believe parts of what L. Ron Hubbard wrote, others who focus primarily on the auditing process, and still others who are fully committed to the space opera Galactic Confederacy story you may have seen represented on South Park. The one unifying feature shared by most free zoners is a general distrust for the Church of Scientology. Just to let people know about me personally, I've been looking into what's going on with aliens a lot. And probably at the start, I thought, what the hell is this alien thing? And thought it was bullshit. But there's so much evidence for aliens. I totally am starting to believe that there's a big cover-up with the government and aliens. There's just all these people who claim that they've been abducted. There's all these footages of UFOs flying in the sky. There's just tons and tons of evidence going on. I mean, John Lennon, the Beatle, said he saw a UFO flying over New York, and heaps of other people saw it that day as well. And it's just like, why would John Lennon lie and just randomly at age 33 years old feel like coming out in public and telling people, you know what, I saw a disc in the sky, I saw a UFO. Like, do you think he did it as some sort of prank and some sort of thrill? He full on saw a UFO in the sky. He wrote a song about it. I think Strange. He mentions it in Strange Days, a song. So, and there's many other famous people as well, and highly respected people as well who believe in who say they've seen UFOs and stuff. So anyway, I'm actually quite convinced that there's aliens going on, and some of these space opera sort of out there sort of stories and that I don't just dismiss them as being silly, because there's just so much evidence for them. I've spoken to many people who've seen UFOs and who have showed me footage of them, and I once saw some really, really strange lights in the sky that moved in just an incredibly bizarre pattern. Anyway, so technically I've seen a UFO. There was 4 of them, 4 lights. It was like, what the hell is that? And a lot of people report seeing, anyway. All right. The one unifying feature shared by most free zoners is a general distrust for the Church of Scientology. Like the early Lutherans, the initial intention was to fix what's broken, believing that it always makes sense to resolve differences internally. Says Sarah, when that didn't work, Luther broke off to do what he felt was the better path to God, just as the free zone did. Yeah, we just thought it was, people who were part of the free zone just left the church because we saw that the church was it was too hard to change things from the church. So it was just like, let's just do Scientology outside the church, and, it's more fun. Start up a new movement, competition for the church. It's good. The alleged emotional and financial abuses of the church have been extensively reported. These are, for the most part, by the way, a lot of the negative stuff you'll hear about Scientology is stuff coming from people's experiences from the church. Rarely do you hear about people, rarely is any of that bad information you hear about Scientology connected with the free zone or independent Scientology. It's all to do with the church. These are, for the most part, the same reasons that drive free zoners to dislike the church. There are other more insular issues like the misuse of Dianetics technology, but primarily free zone Scientologists are hostile towards the church because they don't like the idea of their religion and fellow Scientologists being exploited for a profit. Well, sort of. I mean, I don't really care about the church anymore, to be honest. Like, they can do what they want. I'm not really an active protester against the church or anything. I think the church is a crappy form of Scientology, but I still think it's better than Christianity. Like, I still think someone will get something from doing it. I recommend them doing it. But if the church starts getting really, really popular, I'll be getting quite concerned because it's a bit out of control. David Lacroix has been a Scientologist for 45 years. He left the church officially in 2008 and runs a website, Scientolopedia. It's a great website, by the way. Check it out, Scientolopedia. There's really good information on it, which aims to expand the knowledge base of the religion beyond the church. I think you can get a lot of free. You can download a lot of Scientology books for free. Stuff that if you're in a church you have to pay thousands and thousands of dollars for. You can get it for just free on this website. That's another thing as well. When you're a part of the church, you have to front up a lot of money to buy books and lectures, whereas in the free zone, people are just rebellious and just get it for free off the internet. And it's just like Scientology is supposed to help people and it's good, and the founder wanted to help people with Scientology. So I think you'll be quite happy that people can just, now that we've got the internet, people just download it for free because you can help more people and you get the word out there more. And that's the whole point of Scientology. It's not a money-making thing. Scientology is not supposed to be a money-making thing. It's supposed to be a helping people thing and a self-improvement thing. But the church is just obsessed with the money. The site is not geared towards attacking the church. It's just trying to say that the subject is separate from the church. Yeah, exactly. Scientology is Scientology and the Church of Scientology is a separate thing. The Church of Scientology is a global criminal organization run by sociopaths. You could call up Coca-Cola and ask them about Scientology and their response would be just as valid as the Church of Scientology. I don't know what that's supposed to mean. You could call up Coca-Cola and ask them about Scientology and their response would be just as valid as the Church of Scientology. I think that's trying to say that, like, everyone associates the word Scientology with the Church of Scientology. To Lacroix, the final downfall of the church came with the dismantling of the Mission Network in 1982. The Mission Network was one of the longer-running traditions in Scientology. They were small franchises to welcome newcomers to the religion. They were like little Scientology shops. Someone could read the Bible and think, that Jesus guy had some good ideas, and yet be grossed out by what the Catholic Church has done. The message is not in the organization. These missions were making tens of thousands of Scientologists. They were the heart and soul of Scientology. They were real entrepreneurs and they were making money. Yeah, they were basically feeding people into the churches. So they're like these little shops. And I don't know, Melbourne might have had 3 of them or something. And they would just sell some books, but they would introduce people into Scientology. It weren't like a big proper church, but like people would just go, oh, what's this? And they would do 1 or 2 courses there. And then they would move on to the bigger churches. They got taken over by the head church and shut down and stuff in the 80s. A lot of them. But in 1982, David Miscavige and a bunch of his thugs started declaring mission holders suppressive. That means like an evil person. Being deemed suppressive in Scientology is like being excommunicated by the Pope. If you're deemed a suppressive person, your friends and family within the church will be asked to completely cut you out of their lives, according to Lacroix. That's what happened to the missions. In the past, they were offered a tithe to the main church, but it wasn't enough for Miscavige and his quest to maximize profits and maintain his control. The destruction of the network is probably the most famous example of the antagonistic relationship Scientology has with the Free Zone. To the church, those who practice Scientology independently are squirrels, and squirrels are not to be tolerated. Squirrels is a Scientology word. Just means that you're delivering bad Scientology. There's a whole bunch of aggressive scripture by Hubbard on the subject. Marty Rathbun, the former second-in-command of the Church of Scientology, told Vice, this is an exact quote from Hubbard. He says, if he found someone squirreling, which is his word for being a heretic, they would think that he got hit by a Mack truck, and I don't mean thought-wise. There's a bunch of stuff about how the biggest threat to the 100% workability of Scientology is people going outside of the established hierarchy. Well, I mean, yeah, the problem is that the Free Zone claims that the church is squirrel, and church claims that the Free Zone is squirrel. You know, I've seen a lot of evidence to indicate that the church is screw. Like it's just doing Scientology wrong. It's just like, why bother doing it wrong? Why bother doing it dodgy? You want to try and do it right. Otherwise, you might as well do something else. Their idea is that they're trying to wake up the entire planet to the point where you're a spiritual being and free of your body, says John, a former member of the church who is no longer a practicing Scientologist. There's this idea that before you had a body, you were a spirit. You were like a god. You could transport your consciousness from one side of the solar system to the other. But you fell into this trap, and they have come up with the exact technology to get you out of this trap. And if you fall off even a little bit, you're not going to get there. But the real reason is that they have a money-making enterprise, and even if you believe it's useful, it's still tremendously overpriced. It's nothing more than wanting a monopoly. So the church has turned into a money-making thing because they can do that, and they can charge a lot as well, because people take Scientology really seriously. Someone like me really, really likes it, really, really wants to do it. So if the church is selling these courses, they can charge quite a lot for them because people are willing to pay it. The Church of Scientology has maintained this stranglehold on the religion for decades. Understandably, it's led to a healthy amount of cynicism within the free zone. These are people watching something they love, something they care about deeply, be tarnished by greed, exploitation, and lies. It's like seeing a beloved child become a drug addict, says Sarah. You can't do anything to stop it, and you see others sneer critically when you know how wonderful a person he is or was. But is Scientology worth saving? It's a religion with the makings of a cult. It's a New Age myth cooked up by a man who, by all realistic accounts, was a pathological liar with a vengeful hubris. Okay, disagree with that, but anyway. Why does it matter that Scientology isn't being represented properly? Is it possible to find a redemption in the free zone? The idea of contacting thoughts, pictures, memories, and ideas in your head isn't a new concept in Scientology alone. Other disciplines do that, says John. The idea that a meter might spike when I'm thinking of something and the electrical currents in my body change, that can make sense. Locating a past trauma and having conversations about it, that sounds reasonable. I'll tell the same person to try neuroemotional technique, not just Scientology. If it's helping you, if you think it's doing some good, go ahead. The issue with the Church of Scientology's perspective on the technology is that they treat it like a magic bullet. Use this, find peace, it's the only thing that works. The fundamentals of auditing, the core practice in Scientology, is forging a connection with your past lives, and with other non-human entities, often while alone in a room or with one other individual. You're making a connection. As John says, it's hypnosis. The promises of telepathy, mind reading, and teleporting consciousness is a massive oversell. Along with financial and emotional exploitation, those are the things making the religion a public laughingstock. Someone could read the Bible and think that Jesus guy... Sorry, this is quite interesting. This article has really turned quite negative at this moment, negative to church, negative Scientology. Someone could read the Bible and think that Jesus guy had some good ideas and yet be grossed out by what the Catholic Church or any church has done. The message is not the organization, and organizations can be or become corrupt, says Sarah. Yeah, organizations, any Earth organization tends to become corrupt because we share the Earth with just sociopaths and crazy people who just want to make money and harm people. Sarah is a well-known tech journalist and keeps her beliefs secret to protect her reputation. You can't blame her. Free Zone Scientology is a niche community. It wouldn't translate, but she has come forward in certain moments. I've stepped forward to tell a friend in pain that maybe I know something that can help. At least it's me helping. All of those led into relatively long conversations in which I said something like, I have to start out by what I'm not, and I'm emphatically not a member of the Church of Scientology. Emphatically not a member of the Church of Scientology. I am, however, an independent Scientologist, says Sarah. I also know people who present Scientology with different words or without a label at all. Yeah, it's true. That's why some people, you might be thinking, I've never met a Scientologist and that. A lot of the time you don't even know they're a Scientologist, and sometimes they kind of keep it secret, and you might have even come across it, like actually done a Scientology course and not even known, but they just didn't make it known because they're like, why bother? It has such a negative name, you know? Don't want to make things harder for myself. When a close friend was devastated after she lost her job, I arranged for her to get a few sessions with my auditor. She thought of him as a life coach, and 3 hours later she said, I realized a bunch of things. I think my life is going to be very different now. She has no idea that she got Scientology or Free Zone Scientology. She just had a very good session with my guy. It's hard to know if things could ever change. Most free zoners seem content to practice on their own and opinions towards the church's mandates or guilt trips run from ambivalence to anger. But there are others who are more optimistic. David LaCroix is perhaps the most orthodox of the Free Zone Scientologists I interviewed, and one of the few who believes the church isn't beyond saving, that someday the hierarchy will fall and the corruption will be cleansed. I believe that as well. It will take a long time, but eventually the church will stop being corrupt. David Miscavige is a bully and a strong man, and once he's gone, I think there are many people capable of clearing up the place, says LaCroix. It's not like if he goes tomorrow, Scientology will be wonderful. It'll be chaos for a while, but there's too many people who have a vested interest in those organizations being a place that is fun, a place that does deliver standard Scientology, and trained auditors. Yeah, there's a lot of people involved with the church who generally want Scientology to be good. And there are a lot of good church members. You know, that's why I don't like to pick on them. It's just a small little group at the top, well sort of one person really, they're really causing the problem. I'm not a Scientologist, nor am I religious, but even I could find some empathy within the Free Zone. These people are far more realistic and more reasonable than the church's soaring lectures and well-conquering rhetoric. These people are simply doing what feels right. For the most part, they are happy, accepting, and non-violent. But is it healthy? Is religion healthy? Am I allowed to question what someone thinks will save their soul? Scientology is very similar to Mormonism, says Marty Rathman. If you've read John Cracker's Under the Banner of Heaven, he talks about how Mormonism was always going to be subject to splinter groups and reform movements because Joseph Smith put in the scripture that anyone could achieve a direct communication link to God, so therefore they could proselytize. Scientology is very similar. It's heavily indoctrinated that your faith is a certainty. It's certainty, and any failure is a misapplication of the technology. I had that same mindset. I came to realize that that mindset was ingrained. This realization ushered Rathman out of Scientology altogether. The emperor has no clothes. He grew tired of blaming it on the doctrine and came to terms with the deception of the faith. I recently spoke with a long-time Free Zone auditor who described it as something people turn to when they are in anguish. When the auditing has helped them deal with that pain, they go away to live their lives, which is as it should be. When or if they're in anguish again, they ask for more help, says Sarah. In the Free Zone, I found a community of people who shared the same goals and purposes I do, including the freedom to disagree and the respect towards others' choices. So it's avoided all the abuses of the Church of Scientology, from ridiculous prices to forced disconnection, to ethics handlings, to the expectation that you'll sacrifice your life in order to save it. So it's like you sacrifice yourself to the church in order to get the benefits from Scientology. And I noticed that as well. It was like, it reached a point where it was like the church was affecting me, stopping me. And I was like, well, do I want to do Scientology or do I want to get stopped by the church? And then I worked out that you could do Scientology outside of the church. And I was like, oh, that's fantastic. Okay, I'm leaving the church. In short, I found a community of people who want to work together to use a set of processes that helps us say, oh, cool, I just realized something. And that's all that's expected. Shared goals, attention to making things better, and respect. It's going to be a long time before Scientology rehabilitates its image enough for it to be accepted in casual conversation. It might never happen, but it's undeniably left a mark on thousands of people. The Free Zone is a community of men and women who saw the man behind the curtain and chose not to let go. Maybe that's faith. Maybe that's truth. I got out of Scientology 10 years ago, says John. I think there's something there. I think some people can do crazy stuff like remember past lives, but I don't like how it is so standard. You do this, you do that, you get that, which is so far from the case. He pauses. But 10 years later, here I am. I'm still talking about it. And that's the end of the news article on the Vice website. Yeah, it's quite interesting, Scientology. It really has a lifelong effect on you. And even these people who are ex-Sea Org members who attacked the church, like Chris Shelton, even when you see him, you can see how he's still a Scientologist. Like, as in, he's still behaving like one and functioning like one. Like, he's still got the dedication, the confidence, the professionalism in his YouTube videos. And even though he seems to have quite rejected Scientology and almost sort of like hates it, a part of him is still a Scientologist, you know, just that good side of Scientology. And I believe everyone can like the good side of Scientology because there's just, you know, Scientology is quite good and natural when it's done right. But anyway, after all that news, my God, it's now time to discuss the topic of this podcast, which is all about the different types of Scientologists. Now, I just want to check something. Okay. The different... Wow. Sorry to keep you waiting if you were looking forward to the topic of the podcast. So there are different types of Scientologists. Now, very firstly, there are people who have just tried Scientology, and then there are people who are actually Scientologists. Because you might hear like, oh, Jerry Seinfeld's a Scientologist and Keith Urban's a Scientologist. By the way, that's something new that I heard as well. I hadn't heard about Keith Urban. And the truth is, no, Jerry Seinfeld is not a Scientologist, but he did try it. He said he did the communication course, I think back in the 70s, and he really liked it. It was good. But he's not a Scientologist, but he just tried it. But so if you do hear, because it's usually celebrities, if you do hear a list of all these people who are like, oh, this person's a Scientologist, they're probably not actually a Scientologist. They just tried, like apparently Brad Pitt tried the purification program, which is like a Scientology program where you sweat out toxins. So there are some people who are just, you know, they're not really Scientologists. They just tried it because it's, you know, they probably tried yoga as well. You know, are they a yogaist? You know, a practicing yoga person or whatever. You know, and they're not. They just tried it once. Now, of the people who are Scientologists, there's kind of another breakup, as in they're active and then they're not active. So it's like they do believe in Scientology, but they're just busy making movies or living their life, and they don't really have anything to do with it. They don't do the courses, they don't do the auditing. They're just doing other things, and they're not active. And then there are active people, which are more kind of like I guess, sort of Tom Cruise-y type, like they're involved. I don't know if he's that involved with it these days, but you know, he was heavily involved in the past. But there's the active ones who are real involved with it, that are like reading the books and then doing the courses and going into church and trying to set up new churches or whatever. So there might be someone you probably met, you know, a non-active Scientologist, had no idea they were even a Scientologist. But usually the people who are quite passionate are active. Okay, so now out of the active Scientologists, there are church members and there are non-church members, which are called independents or free zoners. And so the church members are heavily involved with the church and that whole organization we were talking about earlier that's sort of corrupted, And the independents aren't involved with that and, don't have anything to do with it. And the independents might be people who have left the church because they saw things were not quite right. Or the independents might be someone who just came along to an independent thing and got involved like sort of through the back door independently and were like, oh, wow, and found Scientology. And they probably got told how the church is bad, so they probably never went into the church to try it, So of the independents and these free zoners, they're kind of different. It gets broken down into different types, even more so. So there are squirrels, and squirrels are people who don't do standard Scientology, right? And there are people who are sort of independents who openly sort of say that they're doing something different. And there's something called like Knowledgeism, and that's like started by a guy called Alan Walter, and he took Scientology and he improved it, and so it's changing Scientology. So he's called a squirrel, and maybe he made it better. Who knows? But anyway, he'll be what you would call a squirrel, and there are auditors are people who deliver the counselling, who do this type of auditing called they do auditing over Skype. Now, clearly, when Scientology was developed in the 50s and 60s, there was no such thing as Skype. So that's doing a strange sort of – it's changing. It's doing Scientology different the way it's intended. You're supposed to do it with someone else in a room. So you'd call that squirrel. You'd have to call it a bit squirrel, And there might be someone who's just does a tiny bit of Skype auditing for like some emergency sort of thing, which is kind of understandable. You know what I mean? So you wouldn't really call that person squirrel. But if someone's doing heaps of Skype auditing, they'll be called squirrel. And here's where it gets a bit complex because people accuse the church of being squirrel and other things of being squirrel. But only if you really study Scientology and really get the proper materials and really understand it will you be able to spot if something's squirrel or something's not squirrel. That's why it's quite a big, complex topic. But I would recommend if anyone, anyway. Personally, what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be looking for if I'm going to do Scientology at a certain place. I'm going to look to see if that place has a good reputation, if it has 5 stars, basically. Because that's how you can work out if it's good quality, if it's more proper Scientology. Because the more standard Scientology is, the better the results are, the more booming the org is, the better everyone's winning. But the more you do it different, the more you do it squirrel, the less good it is. You know what I mean? But when it comes to something like this knowledgeism I was just talking about, that's a whole other ball game. He wouldn't, if he came across that, it'd probably have nothing written that's to do with Scientology in it. I don't think. I don't even think he calls himself squirrel. I think he just calls it a whole different practice. Or I don't even think he calls himself a Scientologist. I mean, the guy who started it's passed away. But anyway, this is where it's sort of complex and that. Anyway, so so now of the people who have left the church and not involved with the church, there's the squirrels and then there's the independents. And the independents are sort of broken up into different sort of groups. Like there's the Association of Professional Independent Scientologists. There was a centre called the Advanced Ability Centre. There's a place called Ronsorg that's popular in Europe. There's also sort of like a name Free Zone. There might be a group. There's like an organisation of the Great Plains or something. Like there's all these different names. There's for these churches. There's like the Draw Center or something that's in Israel, and there's like a Life Improvement, and there's all these different names. So to give you an idea, if you were to meet a Scientologist, right, first thing you'd sort of work out is are they involved with the church? Are they not? And And then you'd say, if they're an independent, then you'd say, oh, what independent thing are you involved with? And then also amongst the independents, there's also people who aren't really involved with any organization at all. They're just doing Scientology. And yeah. Now, there's sort of different levels of Scientologists as well. Like you can have done barely any of the auditing, right? And or you've gone clear, or you've done grade 2, or you've done OT3 or whatever. So there's like sort of different levels. So you might be looking at two people who are Scientologists, and somebody might be low on the bridge, and someone might be high on the bridge, and someone might be in the middle of the bridge. So there's like different levels of Scientologists, like classifications. And then if they're an auditor, which is a person who delivers the Scientology material, that's again another change in that you could be looking at someone who's just done who does Scientology, or someone who's like a regular auditor as a job. And so that would make them different because they're an auditor. And also there's different levels of auditors. So like there's higher levels where you can deliver real high stuff, and then lower levels and low stuff. So there's all these different categories of Scientology and that. It's kind of like Scouts or something where you have all these different badges and levels or whatever. Oh, like, no, actually more like karate. We got black belt and yellow belt or whatever and all sorts of stuff. There's also another type where, when you're an auditor as well, you can be an auditor at a church, or you can be an auditor just at your house. So there's also that other different type of Scientologist. Because also in the independent field, you might be at like a Ronsorg or something, and you could do it at your house, and you'd label that as being like a field auditor, or you can do it at the centre, and you'd just be known as an auditor at Ronsorg or something like that. There's also something that's called a supervisor, which is like you kind of like a Scientology teacher, like you're in charge of students and you watch over them. So that can be your specialty. You can't do that. You can't really do that at your house unless you want to get students coming around to your house. But it's more at the centres and the churches or whatever, where you're a supervisor and you're like a teacher, and you use that skill. And they're like nicknamed the soup. And they tend to have a fair bit of knowledge, to be honest, because they have to teach a lot of the materials, all different sort of types of materials and that. And then there's of people who are involved with the churches or the organisations, there's something that's called like an executive, and they're sort of to do with the whole management side. So they don't have much to do with the counselling or the therapy or the supervising students who are learning it. They're just the executives. So they're running the organisation, like at your local church. They're like dealing with the money, and they're dealing with, I guess, like sales, and they're dealing with renovations to the building, all that sort of executive sort of stuff. And in the independent field, there's not too much executives because there's not too many centres, because the church kind of attacks them and tries to shut them down. But yeah, there isn't too many executives. But in the church, there's plenty of executives. That's something I noticed about the church. There was just tons and tons of people on the executive side of the coin, and I was like, why isn't there more auditors and more supervisors? Because that's like what we're supposed to be doing here. We're not supposed to have just all these executives. And that's kind of what's wrong with the church. It's just overmanaged and just too much management and too many seniors and that sort of stuff. Okay, so there's even sort of even more classifications of Scientologists. Okay, there's what you call like a public, which is a person that just goes into the orgs, okay, and does services, and that has nothing to do with the running of the churches, and nothing to do with the teaching, and nothing to do with auditing other people. Just goes in and does some courses. They're called public. Or there's like the church members, or like the staff members, basically. So you'd put Tom Cruise, for example, under the public thing because he's not teaching Scientology, he's not auditing other people. He's just a public that goes in. Now, there's also this thing called like Wise, which is it's for businesses, right? And it's people go to them who sort of want help with their businesses, and they put Scientology into their businesses so that it runs in a Scientology sort of way, which if you add common sense to it and think with it, it can improve your business quite a bit. But if you run it in this nutcase fundamentalist sort of way, it doesn't help your business and causes problems. So when there's this Wise thing going on, someone will have a business where it's a Wise business. So it's kind of like a little mini version of a Scientology church almost. Like it's like you'll notice the business will be running a little bit like in a Scientology sort of way. And it's to try and improve their business, and they think it's good and that sort of stuff. But there might be some people who are involved with Scientology only through the Wise sort of business way. Like they're not even going to church at all, but they just are experiencing Scientology and the courses at a business that uses Wise. And I worked at a business that had a bit of Wise in it, and we studied in a little course room for a bit, and some people who weren't Scientologists and never been into the church got to experience some L. Ron Hubbard stuff, basically. Anyway, but that was kind of interesting. But the soup was a bit nutcase and literal and fundamentalist, and it just caused problems. Like in Scientology, you come across a word, you don't know what it means, you look it up. But this person who was the teacher there, basically, didn't really know or understand Scientology and was making people look up and question people on every word. Like they were questioning people on the word, like, it wasn't cat, but let's say the word cat. It's just like, I know what the word cat means. You know what I mean? But the person was being really Nazi and fundamentalist, being, are you sure you know what the word cat means? You know what I mean? Like, and just makes it just screws up Scientology when you do it in this nutcase, dedicated, hardcore, fundamentalist way. It just makes, especially when a supervisor does it, because all their students, they go, you understand that, you know that, and instead of the student going along and learning, the student gets stopped and has to bog down and stop at all these things because this nutcase super is making you look up that word, you make sure you know what that means, and like, it's just like, what the hell? Anyway, it's a shame, because you see something that can be good and then you just get screwed up. And then there's also another sort of type of Scientologist that's a chaplain. And the chaplain is kind of like a vicar or like a reverend sort of, and they can do like marriage services and baby naming ceremonies, and that's the more churchy sort of side of it. And it seems like a pretty nice side of it, and it'll be nice to get trained in that. But yeah, there's that side of it, the chaplain side. So I think that's there's a bit more explanation. So if someone is a church member, right, they can just be the public who goes in, or they can be a staff member at the church, or they can be a member of the Sea Org. And the Sea Org is is like the monks sort of Scientology. Like they've dedicated their whole life to Scientology, and it's volunteer. Like they know they're getting barely any money, but they're doing it for the love of Scientology. And they just live permanently at the church and everything. And this is where a lot of people who hate Scientology have come from, because they've gone into this Sea Org thing and they've dedicated their life for 10 or 20 years and worked out that the church is corrupt, and it really pisses them off, basically. And so they leave, and it really upsets them how they wasted so much time and dedicated themselves so much. And they're also, you get so thoroughly indoctrinated when you're around Scientology 24/7. It's just a bit too much. And so they leave, and they're very disgruntled, and they go to the media and they're like, I had to do this and work for 50 cents an hour and blah, 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 and it was horrible. And within that, like with that whole fundamentalist Scientologist thing where it's dedicated nutcase, when you're in the Sea Org, that's where you get more of that hardcore nutcase, like, yeah, Scientology, like real hardcore. And there's higher up organizations you can work for, and it gets more hardcore the higher up you go. And this really high place, it's like near LA, and it's called like the Int Base or something. the gold base, that's where I think there's some really hardcore stuff going on, and that's where some of the people got abused and stuff, and that can be not very nice. But if you're just into Sea Org and you're working at a local church or something like that, it's a lot nicer and it's a lot less hardcore. But then again, yeah. So just to explain what it's like, so people have different experiences. And a local church member, for example, who's like involved with the church and all that, wouldn't even know about what's going on the other side of the world at the special management or whatever. You just have no idea. Like, it's just things are closed off, and because within the Scientology world, especially like amongst the church, that is, you don't want to spread negative information about Scientology. You don't want to be negative. You want to promote Scientology, and also you don't want to get in trouble, right? So people don't go around talking and telling people negative stuff about the church. They just, if they do have a negative experience, they just don't talk about it. So a lot of shit can go down without many people finding out. So that's why some crazy stuff can happen high up, and people lower down have no idea and can stay in the sort of, maybe it's a cult, for years and years without even finding out because they don't know about it. So that's about it for today's podcast. It's time for you to climb back out of the rabbit hole into the normal world where things are boring and no more funkiness. You've gone out of this rabbit hole. If you've liked this adventure, subscribe to this podcast in iTunes and YouTube or whatever. If you want to see a funny comedy show, check out the Kink TV show on YouTube. Thanks for listening, and until next time, take care of yourself and do what you want to do. See you later.